with that, all that's left is to put the motion before the House. So I move that this House believes that God is a delusion. And opening the case for the proposition, we have the lovely Chief of Staff, Pembroke College, Chloe Davis.
Good evening, members and guests. Thank you, Madam President, for the honour of speaking in this historic chamber once again. And thank you and all of your officers, for all of your hard work this term in producing such a fantastic lineup of speakers. Tonight, we'll be debating one of the most fascinating and immense questions of all time. Is God a delusion? Now, this is such an interesting question, one that scholars have been asking really since the beginning of time. And for me, it's the reason that I applied to study philosophy and theology in the first place. So I'm very excited to hear what all the members on both sides of the House will be saying tonight. But to build the case for side proposition, my argument will read as follows. Firstly, that after thousands of years of debate on this same idea of God, there is still little to no rational evidence for the existence of a God. Second, that most arguments for God can actually be replaced by science in the modern day. And third, why voting proposition tonight does not invalidate faith, why you can still have faith and accept that God is a delusion. But crucially tonight, what is a delusion? A delusion is a persistent false belief held in the face of strong contradictory evidence, if not irrefutable evidence. Now, this is the definition that one of the most renowned atheists of our time, Mr. Richard Dawkins, used in his controversial book, The God Delusion. As you can see, this book is what inspired the wording of our motion tonight, and we are very lucky that Mr. Dawkins is joining us in the audience tonight and has the absolute pleasure of hearing side proposition recount his very own arguments back to him. But before I begin, it is my duty and indeed my honour to introduce the opposition speakers here with us tonight. Speaking first is David Logan, the chair of the Debate Selection Committee here at the Union. I must admit, I didn't know much about David before this speech, other than that he was an avid debater and competed successfully in many various tournaments. But in preparing for this debate, I thought back to the wise words of one of the most fearful advocates of our time, Harvey Specter. Harvey Specter tells us that good lawyers worry about facts, but great lawyers worry about their opponents. So I decided to do some digging into Mr. Logan here, into what makes David such a great debater. I found that he's able to scrutinize his arguments, cherry-pick his evidence, and indeed has exceptional ability of teamwork, given that his own girlfriend is his debate partner. I wish David the best of luck tonight, but if I were one of his fellow speakers on opposition, I'd keep a wary eye out for David's team-building tactics. Speaking second on side opposition, we have Mr. Amish Tripathi, a best-selling author, diplomat at the Indian High Commission, and director of the Nehru Centre in London. Speaking third, we have Cardinal Peter Turkson, a Ghanaian prelate and cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church since 2003. And last but not least, speaking, we have Lord Indarjit Singh of Wimbledon, editor of the Sikh Messenger and member of the House of Lords. Madam President, these are your guests. They are most welcome. One of the most famous arguments for the existence of God that I'm sure we've all heard is the design argument. Now, this comes from a specifically Christian context, but really can apply in all sorts of traditions. If we look around at the state of the world, there's so much complexity and there's so much intricacy. We have human consciousness, we have biology, we have evolution, we have mathematics. And it begs the question, is this all here by chance? Is it just randomly dropped in front of us? Well, we know that the universe is fine-tuned, and scientists tell us that if gravity had only been a fraction greater, matter would have collapsed into itself. We wouldn't be sat here in this debate chamber. In fact, the conditions of the universe are so suspiciously perfect that it had to be designed, right? And so the argument goes that God designed the universe, and therefore he exists. Now, the problem with this argument, and any of these arguments for the existence of God, whether it's cosmological, ontological, is that every single time we are making this inductive leap back to God. And this is a problem. The world appears to be designed, therefore there is a designer, that designer is God. This simply, philosophically, does not follow. Now, we actually have evidence that it was evolution, billions of years of evolution, that created such complexity. And even if there is a designer, why does that mean he has to be a monotheistic, personal God? Why does he have to be an agent? But let's take side opposition at their best. Let's say, fine, there is a God. Now we run into even more problems. How can a loving God create a world riddled with so much evil? And this is the classic inconsistent triad problem. On and on and on we go. And I could go into the various fallacies and the circularities of these arguments, but it all boils down to this. If the existence of God was genuinely reasonable, do you think we would have had thousands of years of debate on the same subject to no conclusion? Probably not. Would we have people like me sat in tutorials going back and forth on the same arguments in 2023? Probably not. Well, in every other academic discipline we have verifiable conclusions. A physics student, for example, would hardly go to their lecture and dispute the idea that there's certain gravity or certain laws of motion, because these are verifiable truths. We have proven them. Whereas us philosophy students walk into our lectures knowing we won't find any answers, and even if we do, we won't be able to verify them. And that's the problem with the philosophy of religion. It goes round, and we do not have stability. Therefore, the rational basis is gone. What we do have a rational basis for is science, which leads me to my second point tonight, why we can argue that God is more than just an irrational concept, but instead, and also a delusional one, using science. In 1687, Sir Isaac Newton came up with his groundbreaking theory of gravity. Many of you may know him as a famous mathematician, but he was also a Christian, don't forget. He confronted a problem in his equations. He saw that he didn't know, essentially, how different gravities would interact. Also, I've heard from, various physicists. But essentially, he came to a problem and was not able to answer it. So what did he do? He went to God for the answer. And he said, God orders the universe, he intervenes with his creation, he makes sure that everything is all right. But a couple decades later, astronomers came around and said, actually, there's a problem with these equations, and we can actually conceptualize of a self-ordering universe without a God. And so, Newton was wrong. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a classic example of the God of the gaps notion. The idea that God is used to fill in gaps of knowledge that we do not have yet. I don't blame Newton for this. I distinctly remember walking into my own maths A-level thinking, God better save me now. So a similar Newtonian attitude. But coming back to delusion, a persistent false belief held in the face of irrefutable evidence. On-side proposition tonight, we tell you that irrefutable evidence is science. The more we discover about the universe, about intuition, about our own morality, about dark matter, about radiation, the more we're able to fill in the gaps of our own ignorance. Till one day, we'll look back on ourselves now, just as we look back on those ancient Greeks who believed that when the heavens opened and the skies were pouring, that God was angry at them. We'll look back on ourselves now and think to ourselves, that was a delusion, and we were being irrational. But why is delusion a bad thing? And this is the sort of conclusion of my argument. I feel like the word delusion comes with so much negative connotation, so much baggage. It's true that as a society, we place rationality on a pedestal. We build these debating chambers so we can have reason and critical argument with one another. But what I think we fail to realize, and sorry to burst your bubble, is that we are all essentially specks of dust in a universe, on a rock, floating around what we like to call the sun. Yet we ascribe so much importance to our lives. We have irrational emotions. We get angry. We fall in love. We care what people think about us. Is this not also, in some sense, a delusion? The way that we literally live our lives? Something to think about. Faith, by definition, is irrational. It is a leap in reason where you are emotionally subscribing to the idea of a God. That's what Kierkegaard says. And that's why tonight, on this side of the house, we're not trying to invalidate religious belief. Rather, we're accepting it for what it is, accepting that there are many things in life which are delusions. And when you lay all the evidence down in front of you, God is part of that delusion as well. Thank you very much.